In the chaos of war, heroes are born in the most unexpected places. Sometimes they emerge from operating rooms rather than battlefields, wielding surgical precision instead of brute force. This is the extraordinary true story of a woman who traded her stethoscope for a rifle scope, transforming from a healer of wounds to a dealer of justice. Her hands, once gentle enough to comfort dying soldiers, became steady enough to change the course of history with a single impossible shot. This is not just a story about war. It's about the moment when compassion and deadly skill collide to create a legend that would echo through generations. Elena Petrov never imagined that her steady hands, trained to save lives in sterile hospital corridors, would one day hold a rifle with the same precision. Born in a small village outside Stalingrad in 1918, she grew up watching her grandmother tend to wounded animals with the kind of gentle care that seemed to flow through their family's blood. Her father, a village doctor, often said that healing was not just about medicine, it was about understanding pain and having the courage to act when others hesitated. The young woman had always been different from other girls her age. While they played with dolls and dreamed of marriage, Elena spent her afternoons learning to shoot tin cans behind her uncle's barn. Her uncle Victor, a former military marksman, noticed her natural ability and began teaching her properly. He taught her to control her breathing, to feel the weight of the rifle, and to trust her instincts. What started as childhood games became serious training, though none of them knew how crucial these skills would become. When Elena turned 19, she enrolled in nursing school in the city. Her instructors were impressed by her calm demeanor under pressure, and her ability to work with surgical precision even during the most challenging procedures. She had a gift for reading people's pain, understanding what they needed before they could even ask. Her classmates often joked that she had magic hands, but Elena knew it was simply about paying attention to details that others missed. The year 1941 changed everything. When German forces began their brutal advance toward Stalingrad, Elena was working at the city's main hospital. The first waves of wounded soldiers arrived like a terrible storm, filling every bed and corridor with the broken bodies of young men barely older than herself. The hospital staff worked around the clock, but the injuries were unlike anything they had seen before. Burns from explosions, shrapnel wounds, and the haunted eyes of soldiers who had witnessed unspeakable horrors. Elena threw herself into her work with fierce determination. She learned to perform emergency surgery when doctors weren't available, to comfort dying soldiers in their final moments, and to make impossible decisions about who could be saved and who was beyond help. The gentle girl from the village became a woman hardened by necessity, though she never lost her compassion. The wounded soldiers began asking for her specifically, saying that Nurse Elena had a way of making the pain bearable. During the siege, the hospital became a target. German bombers flew overhead daily, and everyone knew that medical facilities were considered legitimate military targets. Elena found herself not just treating wounds, but also helping to defend the hospital. She organized the other nurses into teams that could quickly move patients to safety during air raids. Her leadership skills emerged naturally, and soon even the doctors were looking to her for guidance during the chaos. One terrible night in October, German paratroopers landed near the hospital during a bombing run. Their mission was to eliminate key medical personnel and destroy supplies that were keeping Russian resistance alive. Elena was in the basement treating a young sergeant who had lost his leg when she heard gunfire upstairs. The sound was different from the usual bombing. This was close, personal, and deadly. She grabbed a rifle from one of the wounded soldiers and crept up the stairs. The hospital corridors she knew so well had become a battlefield. 3 German soldiers were moving methodically through the wards, killing wounded Russians who couldn't defend themselves. Elena watched in horror as they shot a fellow nurse who tried to protect her patients. The rage that filled her chest was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Moving with the silent precision her uncle had taught her, Elena positioned herself at the end of a long corridor. The German soldiers were moving toward the children's ward, where young victims of the bombing were recovering. She knew that if she didn't act, dozens of innocent people would die. Her hands, so steady when performing surgery, now gripped the rifle with the same unwavering control. The first shot dropped, the lead soldier instantly. The other 2 spun around, trying to locate the source of the gunfire. Elena had already moved, using her knowledge of the hospital layout to find a new position. The second shot came from a different angle, taking down the soldier who was closest to the children's ward. The third German dove for cover behind an overturned bed, but Elena had anticipated his movement. Her final shot ended the threat permanently. In the silence that followed, Elena realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. She had crossed a line that she never expected to cross, from healer to kill her. But as she looked at the faces of the children and wounded soldiers who were still alive because of her actions, she felt no regret. Sometimes saving lives required taking them. Word of the nurse who had single-handedly eliminated 3 enemy soldiers spread quickly through the hospital and beyond. Military commanders who visited wounded soldiers began asking about Elena Petrov. They were impressed not just by her shooting skills, but by her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure and make life-or-death decisions in split seconds. Colonel Mikhail Volkov, a decorated sniper instructor, arrived at the hospital 3 days later. He had come to see the wounded from his unit, but he was really there to evaluate Elena. He watched her work for hours, noting how she moved with quiet efficiency, how she could focus completely on a task while remaining aware of everything happening around her. These were the qualities of a natural sniper, combined with medical knowledge that could make her invaluable in the field. The colonel approached Elena during her break, finding her on the hospital roof where she often went to think. The city spread out below them, scarred by bombing but still defiant. He told her about a special program that was being developed. Female snipers who could operate behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and eliminating high-value targets. The program needed someone with medical training who could also function as a marksman. Elena listened without speaking, understanding the weight of what he was proposing. She would have to leave the hospital, abandon her patients, and become something she had never planned to be. But she also understood that the war was reaching a critical point. The Germans were advancing, and conventional tactics weren't enough to stop them. Someone had to be willing to fight in new ways, to take risks that others couldn't take. That night, Elena walked through the hospital wards one last time. She stopped at each bed, checking on patients she had been treating for weeks. Many of them had become like family to her. A young soldier named Dmitri, who had lost his sight in an explosion, grabbed her hand as she passed. He could sense something different about her, the way that wounded people often develop heightened intuition. "You're leaving us, aren't you, Nurse Elena?" he asked quietly. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak. He nodded as if he understood. "Go do what you have to do. We'll be here when you get back." But Elena knew she might never return to the hospital. The path she was choosing would take her far from the sterile corridors and familiar routines of medical work. She was trading her nurse's uniform for something much more dangerous, something that might cost her everything she had built in her young life. The next morning, she packed her few belongings and reported to Colonel Volkov. He led her to a military truck waiting outside the hospital. As they drove away, Elena watched the building grow smaller in the distance. She thought about her grandmother's gentle hands, her father's dedication to healing, and her uncle's lessons about shooting. All of these influences had shaped her into someone who could bridge 2 worlds, the world of medicine and the world of warfare. The training facility was located in a forest 50 kilometers from the city. It looked more like a hunting lodge than a military installation, which was exactly the point. The women being trained there needed to learn how to blend into any environment, to become invisible until the moment they chose to strike. Elena met her fellow trainees, teachers, factory workers, university students, who had all volunteered for this dangerous duty. Their instructor was a legendary sniper named Captain Boris Petrov, no relation to Elena despite the shared surname. He had over 200 confirmed kills and had survived situations that would have destroyed lesser men. He looked at the group of women with skeptical eyes, clearly wondering if any of them had what it took to become effective snipers. The first week was designed to break down anyone who wasn't completely committed. They crawled through mud and snow, learned to remain motionless for hours at a time, and practiced shooting in conditions that seemed impossible. Elena's medical background gave her advantages that the other women didn't have. She understood anatomy well enough to know exactly where to place shots for maximum effectiveness, and her surgical training had taught her to work with precision even when exhausted. But the psychological aspects of sniper training proved more challenging than the physical ones. Captain Petrov forced them to confront what they were really choosing to become. They weren't soldiers who would fight face-to-face with their enemies. They were hunters who would kill from a distance, often targeting individuals who never knew they were being stalked. This required a different kind of mental toughness, one that Elena wasn't sure she possessed. During their 3rd week of training, Elena faced her first real test. Captain Petrov had set up a scenario using German prisoners of war who had volunteered to participate in exchange for better treatment. The exercise was simple. Identify which of the prisoners was carrying important intelligence and eliminate the target without harming the others. It was designed to test their ability to make precise shots under pressure while dealing with the moral complexity of their new role. Elena studied the group of prisoners through her rifle scope, using her medical knowledge to read body language and stress indicators. One man stood slightly apart from the others, his posture indicating that he was carrying something valuable. His breathing was irregular, and he kept glancing toward a specific direction as if planning an escape route. These were the kinds of details that her nursing experience had taught her to notice. She adjusted her aim and fired a single shot that struck the target exactly where she intended. The man dropped instantly, killed cleanly, with no suffering. The other prisoners scattered, but Elena remained focused on her scope, watching for any indication that she had chosen wrongly. Captain Petrov's voice came through her earpiece, confirming that she had identified the correct target. The man had been carrying detailed intelligence about Russian defensive positions. That evening, Captain Petrov called Elena aside for a private conversation. He told her that she had shown exceptional promise, combining technical skills with the mental discipline required for advanced sniper work. But he also warned her about the price of excellence in this field. The best snipers, he said, were those who could kill without hesitation while still maintaining their humanity. It was a balance that destroyed many people who attempted it. Elena spent that night thinking about the man she had killed during the exercise. He had been an enemy soldier, carrying information that could have led to the deaths of hundreds of Russian troops. But he had also been someone's son, perhaps someone's father. She tried to reconcile these facts with her decision to become a sniper, searching for a moral framework that would allow her to function in this new role. The answer came to her as she remembered the children's ward in the hospital, the faces of wounded soldiers who trusted her to save them, and the nurse who had died protecting her patients from German paratroopers. She realized that her role as a sniper was simply an extension of her role as a healer. She would kill those who threatened innocent people, protecting the vulnerable by eliminating those who would harm them. This understanding transformed her training. Elena approached each exercise with the same methodical precision she had used in surgery, treating each shot as a medical procedure that required perfect technique and complete focus. Her instructors noticed the change immediately. She became their star pupil, the one they pointed to as an example of what a sniper could become with proper training and the right mental approach. As winter approached and her training neared completion, Elena received her first real assignment. German forces were preparing a major offensive that could break Russian defensive lines permanently. Intelligence indicated that a high-ranking German general would be inspecting forward positions, presenting an opportunity to eliminate a key enemy leader. The shot would have to be made at extreme range under difficult conditions, and the sniper would have little chance of escape afterward. Colonel Volkov delivered the briefing personally, emphasizing the importance of the mission. The general they were targeting had planned several successful operations against Russian forces, and his death could significantly disrupt German offensive capabilities. Elena would be working alone, relying on her medical knowledge to treat any injuries she sustained and her sniper training to complete the mission. The night before she left for her assignment, Elena wrote letters to her family and friends at the hospital. She tried to explain her choices without revealing classified information, telling them that she had found a new way to serve her country and protect the people she cared about. She wasn't sure if she would survive to see them again, but she wanted them to understand that everything she was doing grew out of the same impulse that had led her to become a nurse. As she prepared her equipment and studied maps of the target area, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a young nurse focused on healing wounds and comforting patients. Now she was preparing to undertake one of the most dangerous sniper missions of the war, armed with skills that few people possessed, and carrying the hopes of everyone who depended on her success. The transformation was complete, but Elena knew it was only the beginning of a story that would test every aspect of her character and abilities. The frozen landscape stretched endlessly before Elena as she made her way through the German-occupied territory. 3 days of careful movement through snow-covered forests had brought her within striking distance of her target, but the most dangerous part of her mission was just beginning. She carried minimal supplies: her rifle, ammunition, medical kit, and enough food for a week. Everything else would have to be improvised or done without. Elena had spent months studying the German general's habits and routines through intelligence reports. General Heinrich Müller was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his habit of personally inspecting defensive positions before major offensives. He would arrive at the forward command post at exactly 0800 hours, conduct a 2-hour inspection of the trenches and gun emplacements, then return to the command bunker for a briefing with his staff. The window of opportunity would last no more than 30 minutes. Finding the perfect shooting position had required Elena to think like both a sniper and a medical professional. She needed clear lines of sight to the target area, multiple escape routes, and a location that would allow her to treat any injuries she might sustain during the inevitable German response to her shot. After careful reconnaissance, she selected a partially collapsed barn approximately 800 meters from the German command post. The barn offered excellent concealment and a clear view of the inspection route that General Müller would follow. More importantly, it contained medical supplies that German troops had overlooked: bandages, antiseptic, and basic surgical instruments left behind by a German field hospital. Elena could use these materials if she was wounded during her escape, turning her medical knowledge into a survival advantage. Setting up her shooting position required painstaking attention to detail. Elena carefully cleared snow and debris from her firing lane, ensuring that nothing would deflect her bullet during its flight to the target. She arranged her equipment so that she could fire and immediately begin moving toward her primary escape route. Every movement was planned and rehearsed, until it became automatic. The night before the general's scheduled arrival, Elena lay in her concealed position and tried to calm her mind.
I got inside.
She had killed enemy soldiers before, but this was different. General Mueller was a specific individual whose death would have strategic consequences far beyond the battlefield. Success would save the lives of countless Russian soldiers and civilians. Failure would mean certain death and the loss of a crucial opportunity to disrupt German offensive plans. As dawn approached, Elena began the mental preparation that her training had taught her. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and entered the focused state of mind that allowed snipers to make impossible shots. Under extreme pressure, her hands, once dedicated to healing, now held instruments of death, with the same steady precision she had used in surgery. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the morning silence. Elena watched through her rifle scope as a convoy of German staff cars approached the command post. She recognized General Mueller immediately from the intelligence photographs. Tall, stern-faced, wearing the distinctive uniform of a Wehrmacht general. He moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command, unaware that death was watching him from 800 meters away. Elena tracked the general's movement as he began his inspection routine. She noted the positions of his bodyguards, the timing of his stops at various defensive positions, and the patterns of movement that would give her the clearest shot. Her medical training helped her read body language and predict where Mueller would be at any given moment during his inspection. The perfect moment came when General Mueller stopped to examine a machine gun emplacement that offered no overhead cover. He stood motionless for several seconds, pointing at modifications he wanted made to the defensive position. Elena steadied her rifle, controlled her breathing, and began the slow squeeze of the trigger that would send her bullet across 800 meters of frigid air. But just as she was about to fire, a Russian artillery shell exploded near the German positions. Mueller and his staff immediately took cover, disappearing into a concrete bunker that offered no clear shooting angles. Elena cursed silently, realizing that the Russian attack had been timed perfectly to disrupt her mission. She would have to wait for another opportunity, assuming one presented itself. Hours passed before General Mueller emerged from the bunker. The Russian artillery attack had ended, but the inspection schedule had been completely disrupted. Elena watched as German soldiers worked to repair damage from the shelling while Mueller consulted with his staff about defensive preparations. She began to worry that he might return to his headquarters without giving her another chance for a clear shot. Late in the afternoon, Mueller finally resumed his inspection, but this time he moved more cautiously, staying closer to cover and accompanied by additional security personnel. Elena realized that the artillery attack had made him more aware of potential threats, reducing her chances of success. She would need to take a more difficult shot under less favorable conditions. The opportunity came when Mueller climbed onto an observation platform to get a better view of his defensive lines. For just a few seconds, he would be exposed above the concrete barriers that had been protecting him throughout the day. Elena would have to fire at the exact moment when he reached the highest point of the platform, compensating for wind, distance, and the movement of her target. Elena steadied her rifle and began her breathing sequence. She calculated wind speed and direction, adjusted her aim for the extreme range, and waited for General Mueller to step onto the observation platform. The shot would have to be perfect. There would be no second chance. Mueller began climbing the ladder to the observation platform. Elena tracked him through her rifle scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. As he reached the top and stepped forward to look at his defensive positions, Elena fired a single shot that traveled 800 meters in less than 1 second and struck the German general in the center of his chest. The impact threw Mueller backward off the platform. German soldiers immediately began shouting and running toward their fallen commander, but Elena could see through her scope that the general was not moving. Her shot had been perfect, killing him instantly and eliminating one of Germany's most effective military leaders. Elena began her immediate withdrawal from the shooting position, moving according to the escape plan she had rehearsed dozens of times. German soldiers were already spreading out to search for the sniper who had killed their general, and she knew that their response would be swift and overwhelming. She had perhaps 10 minutes before they reached her position. Moving through the forest with practiced stealth, Elena made her way toward the rendezvous point where Russian partisans would be waiting to guide her back to friendly territory. But the Germans had responded faster than expected, and she could hear search parties moving through the woods behind her. Dogs were barking in the distance, indicating that they were using tracking animals to follow her trail. Elena reached a frozen stream and waded into the icy water to break her scent trail and confuse the tracking dogs. The cold was brutal, but she forced herself to move upstream for nearly a kilometer before climbing out on the opposite bank. Her clothes were soaked and beginning to freeze, but she had gained valuable time on her pursuers. As she continued toward the rendezvous point, Elena heard gunfire behind her. The German search parties had found her original shooting position and were firing into the abandoned barn. This confirmed that she had successfully escaped the immediate area, but it also meant that they knew her approximate location and direction of travel. She would have to move faster while being even more careful to avoid detection. The rendezvous point was a small clearing where Russian partisans had promised to meet her at sunset. Elena arrived 30 minutes early and took up a concealed position to watch for any signs of German pursuit. The clearing appeared empty, but she knew that partisan fighters were expert at remaining invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. As the sun began to set, 3 men emerged from concealed positions around the clearing. Elena recognized the signal gestures that identified them as the partisan unit she was supposed to meet. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached them, relieved to have made contact with friendly forces. The journey back to Russian-controlled territory took 3 days of careful movement through enemy-held forests and villages. Elena traveled with the partisans, learning about their methods of operating behind German lines. They moved only at night, hiding in prepared shelters during the day, and maintained strict noise discipline to avoid detection by German patrols. During their journey, Elena learned more about the impact of her successful mission. General Mueller's death had caused confusion in the German command structure and forced them to postpone their planned offensive. Russian forces had used the delay to strengthen their defensive positions and prepare counterattacks that could potentially drive the Germans back. A single well-placed shot had changed the strategic situation across an entire sector of the front, but Elena also learned about the personal cost of her success. German forces had executed 20 Russian civilians in retaliation for Mueller's death, claiming that local partisans must have provided intelligence for the attack. Elena felt responsible for these innocent deaths, even though she knew that the blame lay with German commanders who had ordered the executions. When they finally reached Russian lines, Elena was debriefed by intelligence officers who wanted detailed information about German defensive positions she had observed during her mission. Her medical training proved valuable here as well, since she could provide accurate assessments of German casualties from recent fighting, and insights into their supply situation based on the condition of enemy soldiers she had seen. Colonel Volkov arrived at the debriefing facility to personally congratulate Elena on her success. He informed her that she was being recommended for the Order of the Red Star, one of the Soviet Union's highest military decorations. More importantly, he told her that her mission had proven the value of the female sniper program, and that additional women were being recruited for similar operations. But Elena found that she had little interest in celebrations or decorations. The 3 days behind enemy lines had changed her understanding of what she had chosen to become. She was no longer just a nurse who had learned to shoot, or even a soldier who happened to have medical training. She was something entirely new, a weapon that could strike at the heart of enemy leadership while providing her own medical support and intelligence-gathering capabilities. During her recovery period, Elena visited the hospital where she had once worked as a nurse. Many of her former colleagues were still there, treating the endless stream of wounded soldiers that the war continued to produce. They greeted her warmly, but with obvious uncertainty about what she had become. The gentle nurse they remembered had been transformed into someone harder and more distant, marked by experiences they couldn't understand. Elena spent time with patients in the hospital, using her medical skills to assist with treatments and surgeries. But she found that civilian medicine no longer satisfied her the way it once had. She had discovered a more direct way to protect innocent people and save lives, by eliminating the enemies who threatened them. Her role as a sniper felt like a natural evolution of her calling as a healer. One evening, Elena encountered Dmitri, the young soldier who had lost his sight during the siege of Stalingrad. He was still recovering at the hospital, learning to navigate the world without his vision. When he heard her voice, he immediately recognized her, despite the months that had passed since she left to begin sniper training. "Nurse Elena," he said, reaching out to touch her hand. "You came back to us." But as he held her hand, his expression changed. Her hands felt different, harder, with calluses from rifle work that hadn't been there before. "You're not the same person who left us, are you?" Elena couldn't find words to answer his question. She was still the same person who cared about healing and protecting others, but she had also become someone capable of killing with cold precision. The two aspects of her identity seemed impossible to reconcile, yet they had somehow merged into something entirely new. That night, Elena received orders for her next mission. German intelligence had identified her as the sniper responsible for General Mueller's death, and they were taking extraordinary precautions to protect their remaining senior officers. This presented new challenges that would require even more advanced skills and greater risks than her first assignment. Elena accepted the orders without hesitation, understanding that her unique combination of medical knowledge and sniper skills made her irreplaceable in certain situations. She was no longer fighting just to defend her country or protect her fellow Russians. She was waging a personal war against an enemy that threatened everything she believed in, using every skill she possessed to tip the balance toward justice. As she prepared for her next mission, Elena reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. She had begun as a healer dedicated to saving lives and easing suffering. But the war had shown her that sometimes the most effective way to heal was to eliminate the source of disease. Her rifle had become a surgical instrument, and her targets were cancers that needed to be cut out before they could spread. The young woman who had once treated wounded soldiers with gentle hands had become something the world had never seen before, a sniper whose medical knowledge made her deadlier than any conventional soldier, and whose healing instincts made her more dangerous than any ordinary killer. She was ready to prove that her first successful mission had been just the beginning of a legend that would reshape how wars were fought. Elena's reputation had spread throughout the German army like wildfire after General Mueller's assassination. Intelligence reports described her as the White Death, a phantom sniper who could strike from impossible distances and disappear without a trace. German commanders were now traveling with increased security details and avoiding any activities that might expose them to sniper fire. This made Elena's next assignment infinitely more dangerous. The target was Colonel Heinrich Steiner, a brilliant tactician who had developed new defensive strategies that were proving devastatingly effective against Russian offensives. Unlike General Mueller, Steiner was paranoid about sniper attacks and never followed predictable routines. He moved between locations using armored vehicles, stayed in heavily fortified bunkers, and rarely appeared in the open for more than a few seconds at a time. Elena spent weeks studying intelligence reports about Steiner's movements and habits. She learned that he had one weakness: his dedication to personally inspecting medical facilities treating German wounded. As a former field surgeon himself, Steiner insisted on visiting field hospitals to ensure that German soldiers were receiving proper care. These visits were the only times when he might be vulnerable to sniper attack. The intelligence network identified a German field hospital located in a heavily damaged church about 15 kilometers behind enemy lines. Steiner was scheduled to visit the facility to inspect new medical equipment that had been delivered from Berlin. The visit would last approximately 2 hours, during which time he would be moving between different areas of the hospital complex. Elena's infiltration route took her through abandoned villages and destroyed farmland that had been fought over repeatedly during the past months. The landscape was scarred by artillery craters, littered with the wreckage of tanks and aircraft, and haunted by the ghosts of civilians who had fled or died during the fighting. She moved only at night, hiding in ruins and bomb craters during daylight hours. Reaching the vicinity of the German field hospital required Elena to pass through a network of enemy outposts and patrol routes. Her medical knowledge proved crucial here, as she was able to identify and avoid areas where German forces had set up aid stations for their own wounded. These locations were always heavily guarded and equipped with sophisticated detection equipment. The church that housed the German hospital sat on a hill overlooking the surrounding countryside. It had been a beautiful building before the war, with soaring Gothic arches and intricate stained glass windows. Now it was a shell of its former self, with walls pocked by bullet holes and windows replaced by wooden boards or canvas sheets. But it was still functional as a medical facility, and German surgeons were working around the clock to treat wounded soldiers. Elena established her observation position in the ruins of a monastery located 800 meters from the church. The monastery had been abandoned years before the war began, and its partially collapsed walls provided excellent concealment while offering clear sightlines to the hospital. She spent an entire day studying the layout of the German facility and identifying potential shooting positions. The challenge was that Colonel Steiner would be inside the hospital building for most of his visit, protected by thick stone walls that would stop any rifle bullet. Elena needed to find a moment when he would be exposed in the open, but her intelligence suggested that such moments would be brief and unpredictable. She would need to be ready to take an extremely difficult shot, with very little warning.
Elena's medical background gave her insights that a conventional sniper would not have possessed.
She understood the layout of field hospitals and could predict where Steiner would need to go during his inspection. More importantly, She knew that medical emergencies could create unexpected opportunities, as even the most cautious commanders would expose themselves to help wounded soldiers in critical situations. On the morning of Steiner's scheduled visit, Elena was in position before dawn. She had prepared 3 different shooting positions within the monastery ruins, each offering different angles on the hospital complex. Her rifle was zeroed for the exact range to each potential target area, and she had calculated wind compensation for the expected weather conditions. Colonel Steiner arrived at the hospital in an armored staff car, accompanied by a full security detail. Elena watched through her rifle scope as German soldiers established a perimeter around the church and posted guards at all possible approach routes. Steiner himself remained inside the armored vehicle until his security team confirmed that the area was secure. When Steiner finally emerged from the vehicle, he moved quickly from the car to the hospital entrance, giving Elena no opportunity for a clear shot. She settled in to wait, knowing that patience was one of the most important qualities a sniper could possess. Steiner would eventually have to expose himself, and when that moment came, she would be ready. Hours passed with no sign of the German colonel. Elena could hear the sounds of medical activity from inside the church. Doctors calling for instruments, wounded soldiers crying out in pain, the general noise of a busy field hospital. Her medical instincts made her want to help the wounded, even though they were enemy soldiers. The desire to heal was so deeply ingrained in her nature that it took conscious effort to suppress it. The opportunity Elena had been waiting for came suddenly and unexpectedly. A German transport truck loaded with wounded soldiers overturned while approaching the hospital, throwing injured men onto the road outside the church. The accident created a mass casualty situation that required immediate medical attention from everyone available, including Colonel Steiner. Elena watched through her scope as Steiner emerged from the hospital and rushed toward the overturned truck. His security detail was focused on the accident scene, creating confusion and reducing their effectiveness as bodyguards. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Steiner was exposed in the open with a clear line of sight from Elena's position. But as Elena prepared to take her shot, she faced an unexpected moral dilemma. Steiner was not just standing in the open. He was actively providing medical treatment to wounded German soldiers. She could see him performing emergency surgery on a soldier whose leg had been crushed in the accident, working with the same dedication and skill that she had once shown in her own hospital. The sight of Steiner saving lives created a moment of hesitation that Elena had never experienced before. She was watching an enemy officer doing exactly what she had done as a nurse, using medical knowledge to ease suffering and save lives. For a brief instant, she saw herself in the German colonel, recognizing a kindred spirit who had chosen healing as a profession. But Elena's hesitation lasted only seconds before her tactical training reasserted itself. Steiner's medical skills might make him a better person, but they also made him a more dangerous enemy. A commander who could treat his own wounded would have healthier troops and higher morale. His death would not just eliminate a tactical threat, it would also send a message that no German officer was safe from Russian snipers. Elena steadied her rifle and prepared to fire. Steiner was completely focused on treating the wounded soldier, unaware that death was targeting him from 800 meters away. The shot would need to be perfect, as Elena would have only one opportunity before Steiner's security detail located her position and returned fire. As Elena began her final breathing sequence, preparing to squeeze the trigger that would end Steiner's life, she heard the sound of Russian artillery shells whistling overhead. A massive bombardment began falling on German positions throughout the area, including the church that housed the field hospital. Elena realized that Russian forces were launching a major offensive, and she was caught in the middle of it. The first artillery shell to hit the church created a massive explosion that shattered what remained of the building's windows and sent chunks of stone flying in all directions. Elena watched in horror as the shell struck the area where wounded German soldiers were being treated, killing patients and medical staff indiscriminately. The sight of wounded men being killed while helpless on stretchers filled her with revulsion. Colonel Steiner and his security detail immediately began organizing an evacuation of the hospital. Elena could see him directing his men to carry wounded soldiers to safer locations, risking his own life to save his patients.
His dedication to protecting the wounded was obvious, even as Russian shells continued falling around the church.
Elena found herself in an impossible situation. The Russian artillery bombardment was providing perfect cover for a sniper attack, as the noise and confusion would mask her rifle shot completely. But the same bombardment was killing wounded soldiers who posed no threat to anyone, turning the hospital into a slaughterhouse. As she watched Steiner coordinating the evacuation, Elena made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of taking the shot that would kill the German colonel, she began firing at Russian observation posts that were directing artillery fire onto the hospital. Her precise shots eliminated 2 forward observers, causing the bombardment to shift away from the medical facility. Steiner noticed the change in the artillery pattern and immediately understood what had happened. A Russian sniper was protecting the German hospital from Russian artillery fire, violating every principle of military logic, but following a higher moral code that recognized the sanctity of medical facilities. He ordered his men to continue the evacuation while wondering about the identity of the sniper who had saved them. Elena's decision to protect the hospital instead of killing Steiner represented a fundamental transformation in her understanding of her role as both a sniper and a healer. She realized that her true enemy was not German soldiers or officers, but the war itself. That turned healers into killers, and medical facilities into targets. Her greatest victory would not be eliminating another enemy commander, but preserving the principle that some things remain sacred even in wartime. The evacuation of the German field hospital was completed successfully, with all surviving patients moved to safer locations. Colonel Steiner personally supervised the loading of wounded soldiers onto transport vehicles, ensuring that the most seriously injured received priority treatment. His actions confirmed Elena's assessment that he was a soldier who still believed in honor and humanity despite the brutality of war. As the German convoy departed from the church, Steiner looked back toward the monastery ruins where Elena was hidden. He could not see her, but he understood that somewhere in those ruins was a Russian sniper who had chosen to save lives rather than take them. The knowledge that such people still existed gave him hope that humanity might survive the war. Elena waited until the German forces had completely withdrawn before beginning her own retreat. She knew that her decision to protect the hospital instead of killing Steiner would be difficult to explain to her commanders. They expected results measured in enemy casualties, not in lives saved on both sides of the conflict. The journey back to Russian lines took Elena through territory that had been devastated by the artillery bombardment she had helped redirect. She saw the bodies of German soldiers who had been caught in the open when the shells began falling, and she felt responsibility for their deaths even though she had been trying to save wounded men in the hospital. When Elena reached the Russian command post, she filed a report claiming that Colonel Steiner had been killed during the artillery bombardment. The deception was necessary to protect herself from accusations of treason or cowardice, but it also allowed her to preserve the memory of what had actually happened. She had chosen healing over killing, mercy over revenge, and humanity over military necessity. Colonel Volkov read Elena's report with obvious skepticism. Intelligence sources had not confirmed Steiner's death, and the German colonel continued to appear in communications intercepts. But Volkov also understood that Elena had been changed by her experiences behind enemy lines, and he chose not to challenge her account of events. Instead of sending Elena on another sniper mission, Volkov assigned her to train new female snipers who were being recruited for the program. Her combination of medical knowledge and combat experience made her an ideal instructor, and her reputation ensured that trainees would listen to her lessons about survival and effectiveness in the field. Elena discovered that she enjoyed teaching more than killing. Working with young women who reminded her of her former self allowed her to pass on both technical skills and moral guidance. She taught them to shoot with precision, but she also taught them to think about the consequences of their actions and to remember their humanity, even in the most dehumanizing situations. Years after the war ended, Elena learned that Colonel Steiner had survived the conflict and returned to medical practice in Germany. He had established a hospital that treated refugees and displaced persons, regardless of their nationality or political beliefs. The knowledge that he had continued his healing work validated Elena's decision to spare his life during that critical moment in the ruins of the church. Elena herself returned to nursing after the war, but she never forgot the lessons she had learned as a sniper. She understood that healing and killing were not opposites but different applications of the same fundamental skills: precision, dedication, and the courage to act when others hesitated. Her wartime experience had made her a better nurse, more capable of making difficult decisions, and more aware of the preciousness of human life. The story of the nurse-turned-sniper who changed the course of history with a shot she chose not to take became legend in both Russian and German military circles. Elena's name was whispered with equal measures of fear and respect, representing the possibility that even in the darkest moments of war, individual acts of humanity could still make a difference. Elena Petrov had begun her journey as a healer dedicated to saving lives. She had become a killer capable of eliminating enemies with surgical precision, but her greatest achievement was learning when not to pull the trigger, when mercy was more powerful than violence, and when the true victory lay in preserving life rather than taking it. Her story proved that heroes are defined not just by what they are willing to do, but by what they are wise enough not to do. From bandages to bullets, A nurse-turned-sniper changed fate with one shot.